A young girl from a temple was at a guild registering to become a member. The guild employee confirms that she is 15 and is a priest class. Another party comes up to her and says that they need one more for a goblin quest. They were looking for a healer to help them save some girls from the goblins. She joins and they make it to the cave and head in. The priest says she has a bad feeling, but the rest of the group tells her that goblins are easy. They comfort her and head deeper into the cave. The front two run ahead and leave the priest and mage behind. As the two try to catch up, they see a bunch of goblins behind them. The mage threw a fireball spell and burned the first goblin to a crisp. As she went to throw another, she was tackled by the goblins, then stabbed. The swordsman in the group came and started attacking the goblins. The priest tried to heal the mage while the swordsman protected them, but it didn't work. The swordsman accidentally hit a rock and broke his sword, then was brutally killed. Fighter girl came in to help but got caught by a large goblin. When the fighter was weak, she was then finished off by the goblins. The priest carried the mage out slowly, but goblins caught up and started to attack the mage. However, right as the goblins started at them, another man in armor came in and started taking out the goblins. After he saved the first two girls, he introduced himself as Goblin Slayer and healed the priest. He found out that the mage was too far gone and took her out of her misery. As they moved further and they see the dead swordsman and realized that his sword was too big to swing in a small cave. As they move further in the cave, they set a trap and Goblin Slayer tells the priest to use her light magic. Goblin Slayer rushes in and takes out the mage goblin, then runs back. After they have retreated, the priest uses light magic again, and the Goblin Slayer slays more of the goblins who have chased after them. The priest finds the fighter girl and saves her. The Goblin Slayer finds the goblin children and take them out as well. The priest is crying as there is so much death around her. Once the priest is back in the town, she sees the Goblin Slayer and joins him to kill more goblins. The Goblin Slayer is fixing a fence, and a girl starts talking to him. She is thinking to herself and mentions that he is always checking for goblins and making sure they didn't scout the area before. At breakfast, the girl mentions she must go into town and will go with Goblin Slayer. Back at the guild, a man asks to get help as his farm is being constantly attacked by goblins and needs them gone. After a while, the Goblin Slayer comes in and the priest accompanies him. They start talking about strategies of how they clear out goblin caves and kill them. Once the guild is cleared out, he gets all the goblin quests and heads out. A group of new adventurers were being killed and burned as the Goblin Slayer and priest get ready to attack. The Goblin Slayer mentions his past, how he watched his sister get used and killed right in front of him. He says if you had that experience you would hate them. As he starts shooting arrows at a nest of goblins, their nest starts burning up. The goblins try to escape the nest, but the priest enchants a spell that puts a wall up that holds them in to burn. As they watch the goblins burn, the Goblin Slayer teaches the priest that you must be merciless. They go around back and take out the last of the goblins who escaped. As the Goblin Slayer makes it back to his house, his childhood friend the cowgirl lets him know she will make him food. A couple days later, a high elf and an old dwarf show up to the guild asking for someone. Then a big lizard man shows up and clarifies they are there looking for a man named Goblin Slayer. Goblin Slayer joins the group and they go up into a room to discuss some matters. While waiting, the priest starts talking to a powerful mage. She tells her a story about the Goblin Slayer and how he is very powerful but still only chases goblins. The mage offers her a position with her group in slaying bigger monsters, but she rejects for now. The elf says there is a powerful demon king who needs to be slain. The Goblin Slayer says no because in his eyes the goblins are a much bigger problem. As the elf is about to get mad and attack, Lizard Man says that the Demon King has an army of goblins that need taken out. The Goblin Slayer joins immediately as now there's goblins involved. They go on to say that the military won't help with the goblins, so they need a specialist. The Goblin Slayer gets the location and leaves immediately. The priest comes up to Goblin Slayer and Goblin Slayer says that she can't join this time. She fights back and says she wants to go, so he gives up and lets her know she can do whatever. The group is sitting next to a fire and talking. As they go in a circle sharing food and drinks, everyone starts to mention why they became adventurers. They eventually get into a deep conversation and start trying to figure out how goblins came to be. The Goblin Slayer goes to say that they came from the moon and came here because they were jealous of the water and trees we have. Eventually they all go to sleep. The next day comes and the group is seen shooting arrows at goblins. They start infiltrating the den, and the elf notices something. The Goblin Slayer realizes that someone smart is leading the goblins due to the weird traps. Goblin Slayer points in a direction they should start heading, and they find a goblin waste heap. A girl was hung up begging for help, but it was a trap and a goblin popped up. The Goblin Slayer was expecting it and took him out. Lizard Man summons a warrior to help the girl get out. They find a scroll and realize it's a map. They devise a quick plan and start executing. As they infiltrate further into the cave, they take out more goblins. The group notices that the elf is struggling, but she pushes on as she explains that things are personal to her. They move on and see a group of goblins at the bottom of a pit. Dwarf and priest use combined spells that force the goblins to sleep. After that, the rest of the group slays them now that they are helpless. Before they move on, they notice a huge thumping sound. A giant ogre shows up and is pissed off at them. He swings and starts using fire magic to build an attack. The priest acts quickly and puts up a divine shield to protect them. They survive the blast, and the priest falls over. Lizard Man summons beasts, and the elf starts shooting arrows at the ogre. As the Goblin Slayer slices at his feet, he gets hit against the wall. The Lizard Man holds off the ogre, but he's too quick to attack the elf. She falls and gets injured. The dwarf uses a weak stone spell, but it doesn't do much. Thankfully, the priest gives the Goblin Slayer a health potion. He stands up and gets ready for a huge fire attack. He blasts the Goblin Slayer, but his whole body is in shreds. They realize that he had a scroll that blasted a deadly amount of water pressure into the fire blast. As the group stands there in disbelief, Goblin Slayer leads them to move on and leave the cave. A group of elves shows up and helps them with travel. Back at the cowgirl's house, the Goblin Slayer is finally back and the cowgirl is talking to him. A couple of rookie adventurers are in a cave fighting rats. The boy loses his sword and the girl steps up to use her one spell. They realize that they have no more weapons and run away. Once back at the guild, they let the employee know they failed. The rookie group says they need to find a way to get their weapons back. The boy starts asking people to use old weapons from other adventures. As he is talking to the witch, she gives him a candle, and he runs off. Back to the Goblin Slayer, he stops by the guild and sees the priest. She explains to him that she is now obsidian rank due to all the help he has given her. The rookies come up with the idea that they need advice. As they are talking to Goblin Slayer, he recommends to find a club as it is easier to maintain and almost free. The Goblin Slayer tries to leave and the guild employee stops him because she needs help with promotion exams. The rookie group goes back into the cave and the boy starts beating up rats. He kills one and is actually kinda liking the club. Now back to the guild. A group is interviewing an adventurer and they find out he stole a reward that he hid from his companions. They ban him from the city and the guild for life. Goblin Slayer even pitches in and says that it's wrong. The adventurer gets mad and attacks the guild employee, but the Goblin Slayer is too quick to counter. The rookie group is still under the city and are using the candle to find his sword. As they are searching, they find a swarm of bugs that start chasing them. They run back and turn into a dead end. The boy throws the candle as he commands the girl to use her magic. The attack takes out most of the bugs, however there was still a couple. He beats the remainder of the bugs and slices open the big bug to get his sword back. Finally at the guild, the employee thanks the Goblin Slayer for his help and is nervous because she likes him. Goblin Slayer accepts the thanks and moves on. As the guild employee talks about her crush on Goblin Slayer, he walks back in with a quest for goblins and lets her know he is leaving. A girl is trapped by a ton of evil demons. 3 powerful women show up and strike them with a huge attack and take all the demon lord's minions out. A group of rookie adventurers explains that this was the story of the legendary Sword Maiden. Goblin Slayer's new group is talking about a new mission he found and lets them know he is leaving soon. The rest of the group agrees. They move into Watertown, a huge trading port. Priest gets excited at the temple in Watertown. She gets even more excited as they find out they are meeting the Sword Maiden, also known as the leader of the church. They see the Sword Maiden and they all introduce themselves. Goblin Slayer gets straight to the point and asks where the goblins are. The maiden goes on to explain that it all started when multiple women were getting slain and ravaged. At first they thought it was a mass killer, but soon found a goblin in the act. The maiden also tells them that the goblins are probably getting in through the old underground sewers. Lizard Man gets a map and lets everyone know he will lead the way. Once they get into the sewers, they get to fighting right away. Goblin Slayer is slicing through them easily like butter. The elf shoots the last one and they move on. As they are walking, it starts raining through the ground and reaches the tunnel. Then out of nowhere a giant boat shows up in the canal. The goblins start shooting arrows, but the priest uses the divine shield. Goblin Slayer quickly devises a plan, and when the shield comes down he throws a gas bomb. The goblins start crying and Goblin Slayer rushes them and starts slaying them and throwing them overboard. Arrows start flying at the goblins and take a couple out. Finally, the dwarf uses a giant rock spell that kills all the goblins on the boat. As they are all excited they won, a swamp dragon shows up and eats a goblin that fell in the water. All of them start running, however the swamp dragon is chasing them. The group leads the dragon into a pack of goblin ships, and the swamp dragon gets distracted by them and starts eating all the goblin boats. As the group leaves the area, the Goblin Slayer explains that the goblins are being orchestrated. Something is teaching them about boats and armor. After a while, the priest is at the temple and is thinking about the past, and how she would probably be dead if the Goblin Slayer didn't save her. The maiden decides to join her in the bath. They start talking about her scars and everything she has seen in her lifetime. Goblin Slayer even comes up in their conversation, and how he will leave one day. As the next day begins, the Goblin Slayer shows off his bird and explains that it detects poisonous gas. He also explains that these goblins are smarter because of the mysterious leader. After they are deeper into the sewers, they notice that the area starts to be built more like ancient ruins. They also realize that this is the old city underneath Watertown. As they come up onto a room, they burst in and see a fake prisoner. The door shuts behind them and the bird starts chirping. Goblin Slayer thinks fast and covers everyone with masks, then the dwarf covers up the hole, letting out the gas. They start hearing the door breaking, so they build a divine wall and summon a bunch of skeleton soldiers. Goblins break through and start rushing them. The whole group starts attacking. They use everything they have and Goblin Slayer starts going at 100%. However, a giant goblin hits him hard and he starts spitting blood. The priest loses her edge and loses her divine shield. As all of that is happening, the elf starts getting attacked, and the dwarf is trying his best to save her. The giant goblin approaches the priest and bites her neck. The goblins are ravaging the elf, and the lizard man is fighting the best he can as well. Goblin Slayer gets mad and gets up. He grabs hair from a dead body and starts choking the giant goblin. The goblin gets pissed and starts swinging and hitting his own goblins. The elf gets saved by the dwarf, and they start killing more goblins together. As all that is happening, the Goblin Slayer gets even more mad and punches a hole right into the giant goblin's head. Every goblin saw the feat and ran away in fear. As the Goblin Slayer is walking, he falls, is still spitting out blood. The group goes over to the priest, and the lizard man saves her with magic. Once Goblin Slayer realizes that the priest is okay, he falls and starts dying. Everyone is shocked and can't move. A kid is asking his master what he should do. Master throws a cup and hits the kid. The master starts yelling at him, saying that he needs to be killing goblins. He goes on to explain he needs to be stronger and faster and smarter than the goblins. Goblin Slayer wakes up in bed next to the priest, who is holding him. As he steps to the side of the bed, the maiden shows up and asks him how he enjoyed sharing a bed with the priest and herself. He explains that he was resurrected by sleeping next to a virgin priest. The maiden explains that she is sorry for not being a virgin anymore. She goes on to say that the goblins took her out years ago, and she fears them more than demon lords. The priest wakes up and freaks out, hoping Goblin Slayer didn't see her. Elf Girl and the rest of the group comes in and celebrates Goblin Slayer's survival. They also mention that they need new armor as Goblin Slayer's is all messed up, but first comes dinner. Goblin Slayer and the priest start looking for new gear. They both get new armor and weapons and relax before the next day of goblin slaying. As the next day begins, they are walking through the underground city and see a creature of chaos. Lizard Man shows them how powerful the creature is with a rock. The group plans a strategy and puts it into action. Elf Girl and the dwarf start distracting it. Goblin Slayer releases a bunch of flour and commands the elf to shoot an arrow at it. As the creature uses his beam again, it creates a reaction and blows the entire area up in pieces. Once the group gets done arguing, they find a mysterious wall. They touch it and see the goblin's home and believe it's a gate to another world. As they discuss what to do, they hear a bunch of goblins heading their way. Quickly they think of a plan and get ready to execute. The elf starts shooting at them down the hall and Goblin Slayer starts throwing rocks. Quickly the goblins make their way in and start overpowering them with arrows. Goblin Slayer jumps in the mix and is striking them down quickly. Everyone is taking multiple goblins out as Lizard Man is trying to push down a huge structure. Goblin Slayer baits the goblins in and attacks the big one's hand. Eventually Lizard Man and everyone gets into position, and the priest uses holy light. After, the dwarf uses a powerful rock attack that destroys the whole area, and the whole group hides underneath the structure that Lizard Man was holding. Goblin Slayer goes back to the castle and accuses the Sword Maiden of knowing about the special gate. She admits she knows, and she goes on to explain that she knew but she did it to protect herself. As she breaks down, she asks the Goblin Slayer to help her fix herself. But the Goblin Slayer says he kill as many goblins as he can for her, but he cannot save her from herself. The next day the group is heading back, and Goblin Slayer announces he is going to try to make a special food he found in the town called ice cream. Everyone fell asleep, and the Goblin Slayer remembers a lesson to forgive people and be nicer. He woke up back at the cowgirl's farm and did his daily check for goblins. As everyone else gets up, the cowgirl makes them breakfast. Cowgirl announces she has to go back into town, and the Goblin Slayer joins her. He walks into the guild and no one recognizes him. Eventually he makes it to the guild's repairman and he fixes up his gear. Once he leaves, he watches some new rookies train with a pro. The priest walks in and sees Goblin Slayer. She runs up to him and makes sure he's okay. The guild employee runs over as well and makes sure he's okay as well. After a little, the group found each other and invited everyone out to eat with them. Everyone at dinner had a great time and told many stories together. They also heard news of a hero that defeated the Demon Lord and became a new paladin rank. The guild employee even mentioned a new training hall coming soon. Later that night, Goblin Slayer makes it back to the farm and the group stays at the guild to drink and have fun. The dwarf and elf are having a drinking contest and everyone was cheering them on. Back at the farm, the Goblin Slayer was thinking about his future and the cowgirl talking to him. She says that he should take his time and figure it out slowly. The next day, the Goblin Slayer announces that he found goblin tracks out in the front. He goes on to explain that because of the tracks, this horde is the biggest he's ever seen. Then he realizes that there is probably a goblin lord with them, and something he has never faced before. Goblin Slayer tries to make the cowgirl leave the little town as soon as possible, but she says she will stay for him. He then quickly gets to the guild and announces that he needs help with a huge horde of goblins that are led by an elite Lord Goblin. Every one of the adventurers explain that they need rewards. The Goblin Slayer says he will give up anything such as money, assets, and even his life. Everyone sees how important it is to him, so one man only asks for a drink. The guild members see his act of kindness and decided to join the Goblin Slayer as well for tiny prices of drinks or learning more about him. As everyone is joining or thinking of joining, the guild even sends out a reward of every goblin killed gets a gold coin. The room lights up and almost every adventurer joins, pros and rookies combined. Priest girl shows up and joins him without hesitation. Back at the small town, the goblins are getting ready for war. The Goblin Lord screams and gets his goblins ready for a huge raid. As the first two adventurers see a bunch of goblins holding women with them, the dwarf and witch use a huge sleep spell. Everyone starts to attack and the archers start unleashing their arrows. The next wave of hidden adventurers flank the army of goblins. Lizard Man and the pro heroes are taking out the goblins. They see the next army of goblin riders and the adventurers get ready. All the adventurers pull out huge wooden spears as defenses. Flashback to when Goblin Slayer was making the plan, he goes to say that they need to take out the spellcasters as soon as possible. Back to the present, a couple of adventurers are killing the hidden spellcasters outside the village and a huge goblin flanks them. An army of huge goblins led by two goblin champions show up to throw some real force. The pros get ready to fight and then charge. All the veterans are going all out, slicing up the huge goblins. As everyone was fighting, the rookies wonder where the Goblin Slayer went. The Goblin Lord is running away and Goblin Slayer pops up chasing him. As the Goblin Lord is running, he's thinking about his army getting slaughtered. He thinks to himself that he must get back to his cave to repopulate. Right as the Goblin Lord finishes his thought, Goblin Slayer appears in front of him. The Goblin Lord rushes in and knocks Goblin Slayer's sword down. Goblin Slayer gets up and distracts him with grass and slices his face. He gets his sword back and gets ready for round 2. Back at the little farm town, the female rookie is about to get killed, but her friend saves her. As the elf and dwarf realize that the horde is about dead, they talk about the past. The pro adventurers are still fighting the huge goblins. They devise a plan to attack the goblin at the same time. As the woman slices his finger, the guy jumps in and slices him in half. The other pro takes another giant goblin alone. He uses his chain as a bridge and climbs to stab his face. Goblin Slayer is still battling the Goblin Lord. After getting beat, he stands up and blocks a massive hit. As he got up, he stabbed the goblin, but it broke his sword. The goblin sees his weakness and starts hitting his face in. Right before the final blow, the priest shows up and traps the goblin between two divine walls. As she watches the goblin suffer, he begs for mercy and remembers his past. Goblin Slayer gets up and pushes his sword further in and kills the Lord. The priest heals the Goblin Slayer, and they walk back to the village. Everyone at the village is cleaning up and healing their wounds. All of the adventurers go back to the guild to get drunk and celebrate their amazing feat. Everyone is getting their rewards, and the Goblin Slayer says he might be more open to traveling the world and doing other adventures. The priest was talking to Goblin Slayer and asks him to take off his mask. As she sees his face, everyone else notices and is shocked.